NRCS Careers with Jon Fettig. And so I'll let Jon take it over and tell us who he is, where he's from, and how he got interested in conservation.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Anna. My name is Jon Fettig. I am the State Range Management Specialist with NRCS here in Bismarck. So started my career as a SCEP student and intern. I worked one summer in the Linton Field office, one summer in the Bowman Field office, and then started full-time after college in the Pheasant Field office. Moved around to a few different offices and moved into a range management specialist position early in my career, and then made some changes to a district conservationist, CDU supervisor, and now back to the state range management specialist. So kind of a long career path and through quite a few different offices, but it's been pretty rewarding. In college, I guess, and how I got an interest in rangeland is I didn't grow up on a farm or ranch, but I had family that was on a ranch, and I always spent a lot of time there and kind of got an interest from that. And so in going to college, talking with some of my professors and things like that, we talked about what my interests were and if I wanted to go into wildlife biology or something more related to agriculture. And one of my advisors said, if you like being outdoors and you like wildlife and you also like being on farm, ranch, and ag related, he said range management is the way to go for you. And I think that was some really good advice, and I'm glad I took that route. So
you've had a lot of different jobs and with the agency. Tell us about the training that you needed. You said you got some advice in college, but talk to us a little bit more about where was that and what courses did you take along the way?
Yeah, so I think my career path, or my education path, I should say, is a little bit different than some. I started at Bismarck State College and went there for 2 years. Got my generals out of the way and got everything taken care of there. Worked with an advisor both at BSC and at NDSU to make sure that most of my credits transferred for the program. I think, like a lot of folks, when they're coming out of high school, they're not sure what they want to do right away. And, taking some of those introductory courses, it really helped solidify the direction that I wanted to go for an education. So that was nice. So yeah, I would recommend that, if you're kind of on the fence, maybe starting out at a community college or something along those lines, just make sure you work with an advisor to make sure that credit's transferred. So my degree is in animal and range science. So a lot of my coursework was very focused on range management, grazing ecology, and plants, systematic botany and agristology, things like that.
Did you have a favorite class or professor that you remember?
As far as favorite class, I would say grazing ecology was my biggest interest. Just for me, what I grew up with, working with producers, trying to use a grazing animal to manipulate the landscape, it's just pretty interesting. And then as well, you also get into rangeland habitat management, some of the prescribed fire and different methods for trying to work with the landscape and get some changes that you're wanting to see.
That kind of leads into our next topic, which the students here are preparing for the Envirothon competition. And a piece of that is studying prairies and rangeland. And one topic they are charged with is understanding what stocking rates are and how they affect rangeland, and also thinking about animal unit months and how to calculate them. Can you speak a little bit more to those?
Yeah, so an animal unit month is essentially a unit that we've come up with as a standard measurement. So an AUM is the amount of forage that a 1,000-pound cow and her calf are going to consume within a month. So most operations these days don't have 1,000-pound animals. And So we just make some adjustment factors there. If you're running 1,200-pound cows, and an animal unit equivalent then is 1.2. And then you just kind of scale that up depending on the size of your cow. If you've got a yearling, then we kind of back off on that, 0.6 AUM. So there's animal unit equivalents that go with that. And then you had asked about. Go ahead.
Does that apply for other types of grazing animals, not just cows?
Yeah, yep. So we've got animal unit equivalents. I don't know if I know them all off the top of my head, but if you go, there's quite a few publications. The National Range and Pasture Handbook is going to have animal unit equivalents listed out there. Also, a lot of university publications will have that. I know in one of my books in college, they had an animal unit equivalent for jackrabbits. So they've done a lot of figuring on that. So another part of your question was stocking rates. And the stocking rate is looking at just that, the specific type of animal that is out there, and the kind and class of animal that's out there, and determining the amount of forage that is needed for that number of animals. And then you can also take into account what's called carrying capacity. And carrying capacity is essentially how much forage is out on the landscape. And that available forage, it's specifically looking at available forage. So there might be things such as the slope of the landscape, especially as you get further west in the mountain regions. The forage may be there, but it might not be available to the grazing animal. So those are things to think about as well. Also taking into account diet preference of animals. So what's very palatable to a cow may not be to a goat, and vice versa. So
something that makes NRCS unique is we provide conservation assistance or advice to producers. Say there's students on here that want to have some cattle or another type of grazing animal. How would you work with them on those topics? Like what advice might you be offering to a young producer?
So when you're working with someone, especially if they're new to an operation, I think one of the most important things you could do is go out and complete what we would call a rangeland inventory. And that's where we would go out, we would look at not only the type of vegetation that's out there, but also get some production information off of that. So we would look at dominant ecological sites, and ecological sites are basically a grouping of landscapes that are going to produce a certain kind and amount of vegetation, as well as respond similarly to management. So we would look at those dominant ecological sites on that piece of ground and then do some production clippings. And that's going to give us some information and some baseline of where we could start for a stocking rate for that producer. Now, NRCS offers voluntary conservation. We're not regulatory. One of the other major things that we would do in that rangeland inventory is taking into account all the facilitating practices that are out there, like fence and water, and helping to determine with that producer if they need additional fence and water to help with grazing distribution problems, or trying to improve on what they already have.
Yeah, you used a keyword there that's in our motto. We help people help the land. That's what Natural Resource Conservation Service does. So, well, thanks for talking about rangeland and your career. If there are students out here that are interested in something similar, what advice would you offer them?
So when I talk with younger, either college students or high school, is if you have an interest, say it's in agronomy or rangeland, a more specific area, try and focus on that in your coursework. A lot of times we've been seeing folks that go into college and get a natural resource management degree. And while that broad education can benefit some, when you're trying to come into some of the agencies and go into a technical specialist role, you sometimes fall short in some of the necessary classes for the technical specialist. So if you have a specific area of interest, kind of follow that. The other thing I would recommend is maybe becoming an Earth Team volunteer with some of our federal agencies. Uh, just get a feel for what the job is all about.
Great advice. I don't think anyone had mentioned the volunteer one as much, but in terms of those specific classes, we are including some guides that could give you an idea of what you could take in college so you could have a job like John's. So thanks for joining us today, and we appreciate your time.
All right, thank you.